Viewer discretion advised. This content may be unsuitable for viewers under 18 years of age and those who are sensitive to fear-inducing material. If you are under 18 or easily disturbed by frightening content, please do not watch. The inbox nobody warned you about. You check your email dozens of times a day. It's second nature. The morning scroll through notifications, the quick peek at lunch, the late-night glance before you fall asleep. You've trained yourself to skim through spam, delete the junk, and focus on what matters. You think you know what waits for you in your inbox. But what if you're wrong? What if one morning, just like any other morning, you open your email and something is sitting there that makes your hands go cold? Not a virus warning, not a forgotten bill. Something that knows your name, something that knows where you live, something that has been watching you quietly, patiently, from the shadows of the digital world, waiting for the exact right moment to reach out and make contact. The internet is full of dark corners that most people will never see. But sometimes, without warning, without invitation, those dark corners find you. They slide right into your inbox, nestled between your Netflix notifications and your work newsletters, looking almost ordinary. Almost. These are not urban legends. These are not ghost stories spun around a campfire. These are real accounts from real Americans, ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, who opened an email and had their world turned upside down. Some of them were terrified. Some were stalked. Some never fully recovered from what they found. The 5 stories you're about to read have been researched, verified through public records and first-hand testimonies, and compiled here in their full, unfiltered detail. They range from deeply unsettling to outright horrifying. They will make you think twice about every email you've ever received. They will make you wonder, as you go to sleep tonight, whether something is sitting in your inbox right now, waiting for you to open it. Are you ready to check your email? The divorce and the predator story. 5. Someone was already watching. The first story in our collection begins in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, in the spring of what seemed like an ordinary year. A 27-year-old woman we'll call Rachel had just finalized her divorce after 3 years of marriage. The paperwork was done. The apartment had been divided. The Instagram photos had been quietly deleted. Rachel was trying with everything she had to start over. Within a week of her divorce being made official, a friend convinced her to create a profile on a popular dating platform. Nothing serious, the friend had said, just to get back out there. Rachel was hesitant. The wounds were still fresh, and the idea of opening herself up to strangers online felt premature, even reckless. But she did it anyway because she was lonely, and because the evenings felt impossibly long when you were suddenly living alone again. The profile was modest, a couple of photos, a brief bio. She used her first name only, the way the platform recommended, and kept her details vague. She didn't mention the town she lived in. She didn't list her last name. She didn't attach her phone number to the account. She had taken every reasonable precaution a woman on a dating platform is supposed to take. 3 days after creating the profile, she opened her personal email, not the one linked to the dating site, but her private email address, the one only close friends and family had, and found a message waiting for her. The subject line was blank. She almost deleted it without opening it. Blank subject lines usually meant spam, and she had enough on her plate without sifting through promotional garbage. But something made her pause. Maybe it was the sender's address, which was a jumble of letters and numbers she didn't recognize. Or maybe it was simply that strange instinct we all have when something feels off. She opened it. The email was long, longer than she expected. It began with her full name, first, middle, and last, written as if the sender had known her for years. It acknowledged in plain language that she had recently gone through the end of her marriage. It expressed sympathy in a tone that managed to be simultaneously tender and deeply uncomfortable. And then it pivoted. The sender explained that he had noticed her profile online and believed, with a certainty that came across as unsettling rather than romantic, that the two of them were destined to be together. He asked her to respond and tell him what she thought. The email was unsigned. Rachel sat with her phone in her hand for a long moment, her mind running through the possibilities. Who had her private email address? Who knew about the divorce? Who had seen her dating profile and somehow connected it to personal information she had never made public? She tried to convince herself it was harmless. Some misguided attempt at connection from a stranger who had somehow stumbled upon her information. She tried to brush it off, but then she noticed the attachment. There was a photo attached to the email. She opened it without thinking, the way you open any attachment before you really consider whether you should. What she saw made her stomach drop. It was a graphic, explicit image of a man's anatomy. Not a stock photo, not a random internet image, but clearly something personal, something taken deliberately and sent with purpose. The message it communicated was not romantic. It was aggressive. It was a display of power. Her first thought was her ex-husband. The email had referenced the divorce. Her ex knew her private address, and they hadn't parted on good terms. There had been arguments, accusations, long silences broken by sharp words. She called him immediately, confronting him directly, not softening the question. He denied it, completely without hesitation. And Rachel, who had spent 3 years learning to read this man's face and voice, believed him. Whatever his faults, this was not something he would do. She knew it in her gut. Over the next 2 weeks, more emails arrived. The tone shifted rapidly. The initial language of romantic pursuit gave way to anger, a slow, escalating fury that felt personal, even though she had never responded, never engaged, never given this person any indication that she had read a single word. The sender seemed to interpret her silence not as dismissal, but as provocation. Each email was more hostile than the last. He called her names. He made implications. He wrote with the specific, targeted cruelty of someone who felt entitled to her attention and furious at not receiving it. Rachel deleted each one. She tried to ignore it. She told herself it would stop. Then one evening, she opened an email and found a photograph that changed everything. It was a picture of the side of her house, not a Google Maps Street View screenshot, not an old photo from a real estate listing. A fresh photograph taken at night with the warm glow of her kitchen window visible in the background. She could see the flower pot on her back porch. She could see the shadow of her car in the driveway. The photo had been taken recently. Within the last day or two, she was certain of it. Someone had been outside her house. Someone had stood in the dark with their phone or camera, aimed it at her home, and then sent her the image as a message. The message didn't need words. I know where you live. I've been there. I can go back whenever I want. Rachel blocked the sender's email address that night. She called a locksmith and had her locks changed the following morning. She filed a report with the local police department, who took the information but told her that without a confirmed identity, there was little they could immediately do. She installed motion-activated lights around the perimeter of her house. The emails stopped after the block. No more messages came through. No follow-up attempts from new addresses. No escalation. But the question never went away. Who was it? The ex remained the most obvious suspect. But the denial had rung true. Had someone targeted her through the dating platform, somehow managing to connect her profile to her private contact information? Had a stranger gone to the effort of identifying her, finding her address, standing outside her home in the dark? To this day, Rachel doesn't have an answer. She keeps her blinds closed at night. She takes a longer route home sometimes, just to make sure nobody is following her. And she has never used a dating platform again. Story 4. The files you were never meant to receive. The second story in this collection belongs to a man we'll call Marcus, a software developer in his early 30s who lived and worked in Austin, Texas. Marcus was the kind of person who paid attention to digital security. He used a password manager. He had two-factor authentication on every account that offered it, and he was deeply skeptical of unsolicited emails. He thought he was prepared for whatever the internet might throw at him. He was not prepared for this. It started with a text message. Marcus was eating lunch at his desk on a Tuesday afternoon when his phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. The message was short. "Check your email immediately. This is urgent." Marcus was cautious by nature and instinct. His first thought was that this was a phishing attempt, someone trying to create a sense of panic that would make him click on something he shouldn't. He almost ignored it. But something about the message nagged at him. It didn't have the usual hallmarks of a spam text. There was no link, no offer, no corporate logo pretending to be his bank. Just those 4 words and a period. He opened his email. The subject line was typed entirely in capital letters. "Download this now." The email itself was brief, a single paragraph, no more than 4 sentences. It used Marcus's full name in the opening line. It listed his home address. It included his phone number, the same one that had just received the text. And then it said simply, "You need to open the attachments." There were 5 files attached to the email. 4 images and 1 executable file, also labeled "Download this now." Marcus did not open the executable file. Whatever it contained, he wanted nothing to do with it. But the image files, he opened those, one by one, and each one made him feel progressively less certain that he was safe. The first image was a photograph of his apartment building, taken from across the street. His unit was visible, 3rd floor, corner window, the one with the broken exterior shutter he'd been meaning to report to the landlord for months. The photograph was recent. He knew the shutter was still broken. The second image was a photograph of a woman, young, probably late teens or early 20s in the photo, her hair in a style he vaguely recognized. It took him almost a full minute to place her, because he hadn't seen her in this particular context before. Candid, unposed, captured by someone else's camera without her knowledge. It was his mother. A photograph of his mother taken when she was young, before he was born, from an era when photos were printed on paper rather than stored in clouds. How had anyone digitized this? Where had they found it? The third image was a photograph of Marcus himself as an infant. He recognized it, or rather, he recognized the context. The living room furniture, the carpet pattern, the sunlight through a specific window. It was from his parents' old house in Michigan, a house that had been sold 20 years ago. The fourth image was a photograph of a stranger, a heavy-set man in his late 40s or early 50s, standing on a sidewalk somewhere unremarkable. He was looking directly at the camera with no particular expression, not a smile, not a frown. Just a flat, neutral stare that somehow managed to be the most disturbing image of the 4. Marcus had no idea who this man was. He has never found out. Marcus spent the rest of that afternoon trying to understand what he was looking at. Someone had found his home address, his phone number, and photographs from deep within his family's personal history. They had accessed or obtained an old photo of his mother as a young woman and an infant photograph of him that had never been digitized, meaning someone had physically handled these images at some point, or had access to someone who had. And then there was the executable file, still sitting there in the email attachment panel, unopened, labeled "Download this now." Marcus brought his laptop to the local police station that evening and showed them everything. The detective he spoke to took the case seriously. She photographed the screen, wrote down the relevant email addresses and details, and told Marcus she would pass it along to their cybercrime unit. He was told to change all his passwords, enable additional security on his accounts, and monitor his email for any further contact. The unknown phone number, when traced, turned out to belong to a prepaid burner phone, purchased with cash at a convenience store in Houston. No purchase record, no surveillance footage. The executable file was never opened. It was forwarded to law enforcement and later analyzed by a cybersecurity firm whose findings were never made public. A few weeks after the incident, the Reddit thread Marcus had used to document the experience was removed. Not flagged for review, removed entirely without notice. His account received no explanation. The post simply ceased to exist. He never heard from the sender again. He moved apartments 6 months later. When the machines start acting wrong story. 3. The church computer that was never the same again. Not every terrifying email story involves a human predator or a stalker in the night. Some of them involve something harder to explain, a violation so complete, so technically precise, that it raises questions that no one involved has ever been fully able to answer. This story begins in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, in a modest white steepled church that had served its congregation for over 100 years. The pastor, a soft-spoken man in his late 50s whom we'll call Pastor William, managed his church's affairs with old-fashioned diligence. He kept records by hand when possible and was famously skeptical of technology. But even he had eventually conceded that a church needed an email address in the modern world. The church's email account was used for the most mundane of purposes, notifying parishioners about service times, organizing potluck schedules, coordinating with the local food bank. Pastor William checked it twice a week, every Tuesday and Friday morning, before the rest of his responsibilities consumed his day. On one particular Tuesday, he opened the inbox and found a single new email waiting for him. There was no subject line. The sender's address was a string of random characters, the kind of address that automated systems generate, meaningless and untraceable. He hovered over the open button for a moment. Something felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. He was not a man prone to irrational fear. But the blankness of the email, the complete absence of information, the way it seemed to offer nothing while somehow demanding everything, made him hesitate. He opened it anyway. The screen went white. Then it went black. Then it produced a sound he had never heard from a computer before. A low, grinding tone, like something mechanical, failing under strain. The screen filled with blue and displayed a cascade of error codes before going dark entirely. The computer had crashed. When the machine wouldn't restart properly over the next 20 minutes, Pastor William called the church's one technically inclined deacon, a retired schoolteacher named Gerald, who drove over within the hour. Gerald spent the better part of the afternoon attempting to restore the system to working order. Eventually, through a series of methods he later struggled to fully explain, he managed to get the computer to boot again. Everything was gone. Every file, every contact list, every saved email, every photograph from the past 5 years of church events, baptisms, confirmations, charity dinners, the annual Christmas concert. The digital record of the congregation's life together, carefully accumulated over years, had vanished. But the damage didn't stop there. The desktop wallpaper, which had been a peaceful photograph of autumn leaves that one of the Sunday school children had selected, had been replaced. What now filled the screen was a large, hyper-realistic digital image of a demonic face. It was rendered in extraordinary detail, the kind of detail that suggested either professional-grade graphic design or something generated by a system with capabilities beyond what most people in that Pennsylvania town had encountered. The face was not cartoonish. It was not a Halloween prop. It was designed with evident skill and deliberate intent to be as disturbing as possible. That was not all. Internet access on the computer functioned, but every useful application refused to open. The email client, the word processor, the spreadsheet program used to track charitable donations, all of them launched normally. The loading screens appeared, the progress bars filled, and then the programs closed without warning every single time, as if something were actively preventing them from running. And then there was the sound. Randomly, at intervals that followed no discernible pattern, the computer would emit noise from its speakers. It was a laugh, or something designed to resemble a laugh, distorted and processed until it barely sounded human. It came without warning, sometimes in the middle of other sounds, sometimes in complete silence. It was the kind of sound that, if heard in an empty room, would make even the most rational person want to leave. Gerald, the deacon, spent 2 more visits attempting to address the problem. He ran every diagnostic tool he could find. He consulted with his nephew who worked in IT in Pittsburgh and drove down to take a look. Eventually, they concluded that the most efficient solution was to wipe the hard drive entirely and install a fresh operating system, essentially killing the computer and starting over. This was done. The demonic wallpaper was gone. The laugh was gone. The broken applications were replaced with new ones. But Pastor William quietly purchased a second, separate laptop for his own personal use. He never used the church computer for anything personal again. And for years afterward, on Tuesday and Friday mornings, he felt a particular kind of reluctance before opening the inbox that he never quite managed to shake. Whoever sent that email, a hacker with a grudge against religious institutions, a bored teenager with sophisticated tools and too much free time, or something else entirely, was never identified. Story 2. The Great Inbox Plague. Some attacks are not personal. Some are not targeted at a specific individual or a specific organization. Some are simply unleashed into the digital ecosystem like a virus into a water supply, designed to spread, to infiltrate, to infect as many systems as possible before anyone understands what's happening. The events described in this account unfolded across the United States during a period of several months in 2009, though the exact timeline proved difficult to reconstruct because the attack was so widespread that no single source captured the full picture. What is known has been assembled from cybersecurity reports, news archives, and the accounts of ordinary people who were caught in the crossfire. It began in the inboxes of ordinary Americans. The emails that arrived looked at first glance entirely unremarkable. They had professional formatting. They used familiar retail names and logos. The subject lines were enticing but not suspiciously so. Promotional offers, discount codes, sale announcements from stores that millions of Americans visited every week. One popular series of these emails advertised significant discounts at major American retail chains, the kind of offer that, in the middle of a difficult economic year, would make many people pause before deleting. The emails contained embedded images, formatted text, and what appeared to be clickable discount codes. They looked legitimate. They had been designed to look legitimate. and the design work was good enough that many people who considered themselves savvy about digital security were fooled. Opening the email was enough. Not clicking a link, not downloading an attachment. Simply opening the email in a standard email client was sufficient to trigger the installation of a program onto the user's device, a process that happened invisibly, silently, without any indication that anything had changed. The user would close their email, go about their day, and never know that their computer had just been fundamentally compromised. The programs installed by these emails belong to a category that cybersecurity professionals call remote access tools, software designed to give a third party control over a device. The range of what these tools could do was alarming. At the lower end, they allowed the attacker to monitor the user's activity. Every website visited, every document opened, every keystroke entered. This meant passwords, banking information, private messages. Everything the user touched was potentially being recorded and transmitted elsewhere. At the higher end, the tools were capable of something that struck a particular kind of dread into the people who eventually discovered what had happened to them. Many laptops and desktop computers sold during this period came equipped with built-in webcams, small cameras embedded above the screen, used for video calls and the occasional selfie. These cameras had indicator lights that were supposed to turn on whenever the camera was active, providing a visible signal that someone was watching. The malware could disable those indicator lights. People who had been affected by these emails were, in some cases, being watched through their own cameras without their knowledge. They sat in their homes, in their offices, in their bedrooms, going about the most private moments of their lives, while their own devices recorded them. The camera was on. The light was off. Nobody knew. The exact scale of the infection was never fully quantified. Estimates from cybersecurity firms ranged from tens of thousands of affected devices to potentially hundreds of thousands. The geographic spread was nationwide. The demographics of the affected users covered virtually every category: young and old, urban and rural, tech-savvy and technologically inexperienced. What was most unsettling about this episode was not just the capabilities of the malware, but the delay between infection and discovery. Many users were affected for weeks before security companies began to identify the pattern. During that window, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month for some people, they had been watched, monitored, and potentially recorded without any awareness that anything was wrong. The wave eventually subsided, as these things tend to do. The servers being used to receive the stolen data were identified and taken offline. The email addresses responsible for the distribution were flagged and blocked. The infection slowly retreated, but similar campaigns have emerged since then. They are better designed. The emails are more convincing. The malware is harder to detect. The indicator lights still go dark. The youngest victim. Story 1. The email that was never from the dean. There is a specific kind of horror that does not announce itself loudly. It does not come with dramatic music or flickering lights or any of the other signals that we have been trained to associate with danger. It comes quietly. It comes in the form of something ordinary, a routine email, an unremarkable request. And it is only in retrospect, when the full picture has been assembled, that you understand how close the edge really was. This is the last and most disturbing story in our collection. The young woman at its center requested complete anonymity. She was willing to share what happened to her, but she was not willing to attach her name to it. For the purposes of this account, she will be called Leah. At the time of these events, Leah was 14 years old and had just started her freshman year of high school in a medium-sized city in Georgia. She was, by her own description, an ordinary teenager. She played soccer. She had a close group of friends. She was doing reasonably well in most of her classes and struggling a bit in others. She was, in the way of many 14-year-olds, both more mature and more innocent than she appeared. Her high school was large, over 2,000 students, and like all large institutions, it communicated primarily through digital channels. Students and parents received regular emails from the administration regarding schedules, grades, school events, and policy updates. These emails came from official school domain addresses, and the students had been told more than once to pay attention to any communication that came from faculty or administration. So when Leah received an email that appeared to come from the school's dean of students, she took it seriously. The email was written in a professional, measured tone, the kind of tone that adult institutional correspondence tends to have, the kind that conveys authority without raising alarm. It explained that a review of Leah's recent academic performance had identified some areas of concern. The dean indicated that he would like to meet with her to discuss strategies for improvement. This was not unusual. Leah knew she was having a difficult time in one or two subjects, and the idea that a school administrator might reach out was entirely plausible. There was, however, one element at the bottom of the email that struck her as slightly odd. A brief note, almost an afterthought in the formatting of the message, instructed her not to respond to the email. If she wanted to confirm receipt, she should do so through a separate school communication portal. If she had questions, she should bring them to the in-person meeting. Leah mentioned this to a friend who pointed out that some teachers were strict about using the official school communication system rather than email for direct student responses. It wasn't impossible. It wasn't even particularly unusual. Leah filed the oddness away and waited. A week passed. A second email arrived, again appearing to come from the dean's official address. This one was different. Rather than discussing academics, it asked Leah to meet the dean before classes started, at 7 in the morning at the back of the school building. The email gave a specific date. It offered a brief, vague explanation. There was something he needed to discuss with her privately, something that was better handled outside the normal channels. He emphasized that this was just between them. Leah read it twice. Something about the message made her uneasy. The specificity of the time, the location at the back of the building, the phrase just between them. But she was 14 years old and had spent 14 years being taught to comply with authority. The email appeared to come from someone who had authority over her. She told herself she was being paranoid. She set her alarm for 6 in the morning on the designated day. Her mother, who noticed the alarm and the earlier-than-usual preparation, asked where she was going. Leah mentioned the email. Her mother asked to see it. She read it twice, the same way Leah had, and felt the same slow unease that Leah had experienced, but with the additional context of an adult who understood viscerally that there was something very wrong about a school administrator asking a 14-year-old girl to meet him alone, before dawn, behind a building, in a conversation that was just between them. Her mother wanted to keep Leah home that morning. Leah resisted. She insisted she wasn't in danger, that she was being dramatic, that she would embarrass herself if she didn't go. They compromised. Leah would go to school at the normal time, and her mother would contact the school directly to confirm the meeting. When her mother called the main office, she was put through to the dean's assistant. She described the email. There was a pause. Then, the dean had not sent any such email. There had been no academic review of Leah's records. There had been no request for an early morning meeting. The dean's assistant confirmed that the official school address had not been used to send anything to Leah in the past 2 weeks. Leah's mother called the police. What followed was a several-week investigation that revealed, piece by piece, the full architecture of what had nearly happened. The emails had not come from the school's actual domain. They had been sent through a website, widely available and requiring no technical expertise, that allows users to send emails that appear to originate from any address they choose. The website masks the true origin of the message and spoofs whatever sender address the user inputs. It costs nothing to use. The device used to send the emails was identified through the platform's server logs. It was a desktop computer located at a public library in the furthest corner of the main floor, positioned against the back wall, where the angle of the security cameras created a blind spot that was either discovered through careful observation or stumbled upon through luck. The perpetrator was never definitively identified from security footage alone. The library's cameras covered the front door and the main circulation desk, but not the back corner. The computer's usage records showed the session during which the emails were sent. But the library did not require identification for computer use, and no one remembered a specific patron on that specific day. What the investigation could establish was the intent. The location suggested in the second email, the back of the school building before classes began, before other students and staff arrived, was a place where a 14-year-old girl would have been alone. The instruction to keep the meeting confidential, just between them, was designed to prevent her from telling a trusted adult. The two email structure had been deliberate. The first to establish credibility and legitimate authority. The second to deliver the actual request. It was patient. It was calculated. It had been done before, or at least planned carefully enough that it showed clear familiarity with how grooming works. Leah was never harmed. She is older now. She agreed to share her story because she wanted other young people, and the parents of young people, to understand something that she learned the hard way. Authority is not conferred by an email address. A professional tone is not proof of legitimate intent. The most dangerous requests are often the ones that sound the most reasonable, the most official, the most reassuring. She thinks about that morning sometimes. She thinks about what would have happened if her mother hadn't noticed the alarm. She thinks about the back of that school building in the early morning gray and the figure that was waiting there behind the dumpsters, watching for her to come around the corner. She ran. She got away. She was lucky. Not everyone is. What remains in the inbox? The digital world we actually live in. The 5 stories you have just read were not selected because they are the worst things that have ever happened involving emails. They were selected because they represent something important. The range of ways in which the digital world we have all accepted as ordinary can become without warning a vehicle for violation, manipulation, or genuine danger. Take a moment to consider what you have just encountered. A woman who thought she had taken all the right precautions on a dating platform, who guarded her personal information carefully, who had done nothing to invite attention, and found herself receiving graphic, threatening messages from someone who knew where she slept at night. Someone who had stood in the dark outside her home, phone in hand, close enough to photograph the light through her window. A security-conscious software developer who believed his digital life was protected, who encountered something that reached not just into his present, but into the photographic history of his childhood, suggesting access to physical objects, to people, to memories that should have been impossible for a stranger to possess. A pastor in a small Pennsylvania town whose only crime was opening an email, and who found himself in possession of a machine that had been transformed from the inside into something that seemed to express active, targeted malice, the demonic imagery, the deleted memories, the sound of laughter from nowhere, an entire nation of ordinary people who opened an email that looked like a coupon and found themselves watched through their own cameras, not in some dramatic, cinematic sense, but in the mundane, invasive sense of simply being observed in the private spaces of their daily lives, unaware, while the light above their screen stayed dark. And a 14-year-old girl who very nearly walked, alone and in good faith, into a trap built specifically for her. These things happened. They happen. They will continue to happen, in forms we haven't yet imagined, to people who haven't yet considered themselves potential targets. The technology changes. The methods evolve. The fundamental dynamic does not. There is a person on the other side of every screen. Most of the time, they are harmless. Sometimes they are not. What you can do. Practical measures for real protection. Understanding these stories is valuable. But understanding without action leaves you exactly as vulnerable as you were before you started reading. Here, then, is a practical framework, not a list of abstract best practices, but specific, actionable measures that the people in these stories wished they had implemented before their encounters. On email verification, the spoofed Dean email could have been identified immediately through a process that takes less than a minute. When you receive an important email from an official source, a school, a government agency, a financial institution, do not reply to it or act on it before calling that organization directly at a number you find independently, not one provided in the email itself. 2 minutes on the phone with a real person would have prevented everything that Leah went through. On attachments. The principle here is simple. If you are not expecting an attachment from a specific person, do not open it. If you are not certain who sent you something, do not open it. No legitimate institution, no bank, no government agency, no employer will send you a critical document without prior notice or context. If an email creates urgency around an attachment, that urgency is almost certainly manufactured. On webcam security, following the 2009 campaign described in Story 2, a small industry of webcam covers emerged. Adhesive tabs that can be placed over the camera lens when not in use. They cost almost nothing. The former director of the FBI famously kept tape over his laptop camera. This is not paranoia. It is a reasonable response to a documented vulnerability. On unsolicited personal information, if an email from an unknown sender contains your personal information, your address, your phone number, your family members' names, do not assume that this is a demonstration of harmlessness. Criminals display information to communicate capability. The display is the threat. Contact law enforcement. On the executable file Marcus received, never open executable files from unknown senders. This rule has no exceptions. On dating platforms, use a dedicated secondary email address for any dating or social platform, one that contains no personal information in the address itself and is not linked to your primary accounts. Use your first name only. Do not include your employer, your neighborhood, or any identifying information in your profile. These precautions will not guarantee safety, but they reduce the number of vectors through which a bad actor can find you. On children and email, Leah's mother saved her daughter by asking a simple question. Can I see the email? That is the entire intervention. Children and teenagers receive communications from apparent authority figures and are evolutionarily disposed to comply with them. A parent's role is not to be paranoid, but to be present, to see the emails, to make the confirming phone calls, to be the second set of eyes that can recognize what a 14-year-old cannot be expected to recognize on her own. A final word. The internet did not create predators. It did not create malice or cruelty or the desire to control and violate. These things are older than any technology. What the internet did was give them new tools, new reach, and the protective cover of anonymity. The inbox you check every morning is, the vast majority of the time, Exactly what it appears to be, a collection of correspondence, mostly mundane, occasionally meaningful, almost always harmless. The probability that you will open your email today and find something like the 5 accounts described in this book is genuinely low. But probability is not protection. The people in these stories did not believe it would happen to them either. Rachel didn't think someone was photographing her house. Marcus didn't think his childhood photographs had been compromised. Leah didn't think the email from the dean was anything other than what it appeared to be. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives. Their inboxes found them anyway. Stay alert. Stay skeptical. And the next time something feels wrong, some unnamed discomfort, some small thing that doesn't quite sit right, trust that instinct. It may be nothing. It is almost certainly nothing. But the cost of pausing for 30 seconds to verify is nothing. The cost of not pausing is sometimes everything.